Hello guys. Today I am here to tell you an unforgettable story about the most conventional theme about evil, which is a universal part of the human condition. The story I am going to tell describes the best part of the evils, the tragic operation of fate and different versions of the conflict. The story describes the real, social events and struggles that are controlled in the end. So stay with me till the end. The evil in its head. The story starts with the small, loose stones littered on the floor with sparkling, like topaz under the flickered orange glow. A cave where the deepest part lies, where a dark figure rocks back and forth, hands pulling at his hair while unintelligible screams dance off the dense stone walls. A shaman approaches and others emerges from the darkness until finally the figure surrounded and they called out Ji Lu. The group restrains the figure, flattening him to the floor by using his knees and caplars. The shaman secures his patient's head. A female places a flint in the shaman's hand. He cuts a small patch of hair from his patient's scalp. Next, the female hands him a reindeer antler with an end whittled to a point. The shaman patch of scalp, the shaman rubs the antler between his palms, sweat dripping from his prominent brow ridge. The scent of burning hair and bone wafts through the dank enclosure. It seemed that he was trying his patient to set his head on fire. Soon the blood flickered with each rotation of the antler. After 3 hours of careful perforation, a yellow-tinged fluid rushed out of the newly bored hole. The shaman prods the hole with his calloused finger, finally claiming his trophy, a skull disc, which he will wear around his neck. An attendee wipes the patient's head with a piece of animal hide and urinates on the hole. Once cleaned, the shaman packs the hole with reindeer fat and the patient moved to the furthest part of the cave to heal. The procedure was a success, at least for now. The first 48 hours are critical for that time. After collecting of the blood of the patient, the shaman mixes it in rendered fat and ashes, dips his finger into a small shell palette, and begins painting ruddy antlers on the head of a humanoid figure. After finishing, he points to the strange chimera grinning back to him with rippled cave wall and proclaims Ji Lu. Drilling a permanent hole in the skull, or trepanning, is the oldest known surgical procedure, dating back to the late Paleolithic era. Archaeologists have excavated the remains of a Neanderthal man at Mount Zagru in Iraq, dating back at least 60,000 years. In the 2nd century CE, Greek physician, surgeon, and philosopher Galen described trepanation, for when we chisel out the fragments of bone we are compelled for safety to put underneath the so-called protectors of the meninges, and if these are pressed too heavily on the brain, the effect is to render the person senseless as well as incapable of all voluntary motion. Galenos, 1997. Absolutely, this was a tricky procedure. Perhaps trepanning was found in just about every part of the world. From the highest plateaus of China, through the caves of Western Europe, to the peaks of the Andes. But the question comes, why would ancient, let alone prehistoric, people drill holes in one another's heads? Well, despite of that, there was a wide archaeologists disagree about why people performed trepanation. Some believe it was done to cure migraine headaches, convulsions, epilepsy, or traumatic head injury. Others believe it was done to allow the exit or even entrance of evil entities. Other scholars agreed, even publishing that the procedure may have been considered a sacred operation because the hole would permit the escape of the imprisoned spirit, devil, demon, or other supernatural being. The universal popularity of the procedure leads many scholars to believe that trepanning served a ritual function. More recently, archaeological evidence supporting the ritual origin of trepanation was uncovered in a far southern region of Russia, near the Black Sea. Researchers found the skeletal remains of 35 humans, distributed among 20 separate graves, dating back to about 5000 and 3000 BCE. One of the graves contained the skeletons of 5 adults who had all been trepanned. The skulls of 2 women, 3 men, and a teenage girl all had holes several centimeters wide. The holes were cut into the same location, the obelian. The obelian is in the back of the head, toward the top. To the archaeologist, this was shocking, as less than 1% of all recorded trepanations are located in this part of the head. It is in this area of the brain, above the superior sagittal sinus, where blood collects before flowing into the brain's main venous branches. Thus, opening the skull near the obelian could cause major bleeding and death. There were some excavation with similar signs of obelian trepanation, attesting that these ancient people saw the procedure as being worth the risk. None of the skeletal remains had any signs of illness of trauma, meaning the holes were drilled into their heads when they were healthy. To researchers, this was a clear sign that trepanation had been done as a ritual, rather than a medical procedure. Of all the prehistoric trepan skulls found to date, the largest number of samples come from Peru, where they were drilling holes in their heads since at least 400 BCE. Upon learning this, Broca determined that trepanation proved the ancient people of the pre-conquest New World were far more advanced than other scholars initially thought. However, trepanning was not the only cranial procedure performed in the ancient world. Artificial cranial deformation or modification, which resulted in elongated skulls, is also found in Mesoamerican populations. Although some claim that these elongated skulls have some sort of extraterrestrial connection, the real reason for the practice of skull binding is a bit more obscure, hence, the misinformation. The motivation behind skull elongation is indeed otherworldly but has less to do with aliens, and more to do with demons. Elongated skulls. The Mesoamericans saw the head a sort of spiritual receptacle. Their unique concept of the soul was called tonali, the root of which, tona, points to an association with the sun. The tonali was a soul that derived its energy and power from the sun's heat. This powerful spiritual heat resided in the head. This belief was shared by the Nahuatl people of Mesoamerica. When the children of the Nahuatl were born, they believed the gods breathed the tonali into them. This process awakened the infant's consciousness and united him with his destiny. There was this one problem occurred that infants have a soft skull with an open fontanelle, the membranous gap between the cranial bones that allows the skull to stretch in response to the natural expansion of the brain during development. This gap in the skull made newborns especially vulnerable. The risk was twofold. The infant could lose his tonali from that opening, or perhaps worse, evil spirits could enter the infant's head. To prevent the loss of the infant's soul and/or demonic possession, his head was tightly bound. This binding gradually forced the skull to form into a conical shape. The Mesoamericans were not the only people who connected the head to the spirit world. Evidence in the archaeological record indicates that the head has often been an object of special spiritual significance. If you like this video, please help me by hitting the like button, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, so you will not miss any new videos like this. Skull cults. In addition to drilling and binding the head, people earlier used to do other type of surgical exorcisms. Other places like Italy, Germany, France, Yugoslavia, and China, skulls have been found that were broken apart at the base in order to extract the brain. Archaeologists argue that apart from ritual cannibalism and headhunting, the skulls may have been emptied to rid them of evil entities. Veneration of the human head was common in the ancient world, but evidence of just how sophisticated it was can be found in some of the oldest sites. In the Neolithic communities in the territory of modern Turkey and the Levant, skull cults were quite common. Evidence found at Göbekli Tepe, at a site at least 11,000 years old, that it was once used by skull cults. Monuments at the site formed oval walls, and in the center of each were two T-shaped megaliths, the largest measuring more than 5 meters in height. Analysis suggests that Göbekli Tepe was used as a temple, but not all scholars agree. This site has both surprised and puzzled archaeologists because the hunter-gatherers who inhabited the region hadn't yet learned agriculture, so the question arises, how were they able to erect such monumental limestone structures? One theory about the site is that it functioned as a temple. Recent excavations seem to support this theory. Archaeologists have unearthed about 700 fragments of human bones, of which more than 400 are parts of skulls. Now again the other question arises at why did these scraps attract scientists' attention? These skulls had evidence of trepanation, many strange incisions, and also ochre marks. There were no signs of healing, indicating that the skull modifications were made shortly after death. Researchers have been unable to determine to whom these skulls belonged. Were they revered ancestors or killed enemies? It is also not clear whether the ritual was conducted here, or if the skulls were brought to Göbekli Tepe from somewhere else. One thing is for sure, inhabitants of Göbekli Tepe had a special relationship to the heads of the deceased. More examples point to this, like the headless figure with a phallus on one of the T-shaped monoliths, statues with separated heads, as well as predatory animals clutching in their claws something resembling a severed head. There is also a limestone figure of a creature on its knees holding a human head in its hands. The Dayak people of Borneo, for example, believed that after death, one's body was vulnerable to evil spirits and therefore must be exorcised to protect the deceased and their family from demons. A great feast lasted for nearly a month and included rituals performed to relieve the deceased's family from their demonic possession. For the family members to be considered rid of the demons, they were required to undergo a merciless purification ritual. First, the surviving family selected a human victim. Then, the victim was chained to a sacrificial post, while the surviving male relatives of the deceased took turns dancing and torturing the victim. They abused the victim with spears to induce the greatest pain possible because the grislier the torture, the happier the souls of the departed were supposed to be as they made their way to heaven. When the victim was brutalized beyond the point of survival, he fell to the ground like a human piñata and was decapitated. A priestess collected the victim's blood and sprinkled it onto the family members. Could a ritual like this have occurred at Göbekli Tepe? Some archaeologists believe it is possible, but we may never know for sure. Nevertheless, the widespread belief that somehow the human head could be infiltrated by spirits, whether good or evil, begs the question, why? Why the head? It would seem obvious to contemporary people because we know about the importance of the brain. However, understanding the role of the brain to consciousness is a relatively new development. In the 4th century BCE, Aristotle proposed that the brain was a non-primary organ that merely served as a cooling agent for the heart and functioned like a radiator. He explained that the heart, being the origin of fiery emotions like love and hate, was warm. Therefore, blood would go from the warm heart to the brain to be cooled. To Aristotle, this meant that the heart was the source of cons. The heart is warm, active, and filled with blood. It is logically the seat of the soul. Aristotle's anatomic findings dominated medical thinking for the next 500 years. Reached his conclusion after observing the effects of brain injuries on the mental abilities of his patients. Galen concluded that the brain, like the Mesoamericans, other nature-dwelling people, may have thought that because the head is closest to the sky, it is better positioned to receive and transmit spiritual energy. In a religious sense, there are many faiths that encourage a head covering, recognizing the head as a sort of satellite receiver that can be tuned into spiritual messages from above. Would this thinking apply to evil spirits? Thinking of evil as residing above us, rather than below, is only strange, and imagining it from a contemporary perspective, one that has been enculturated to recognize hellish tropes like horned red devils that poke burning sinners with pitchforks in a fiery underworld. The main important question is that where did this idea originate? When evil came down to earth. In many contemporary cultures, demons are not located above our heads, but rather below our feet. We do not typically imagine demons coming down from the heavens because hell is an underworld. However, the belief that the spirit world is somewhere in the skies above is shared by a surprising number of ancient people. Man has celestialized his gods in such a way as to connect them with the sun, moon, planets, and stars. Even Lucifer, a name synonymous with modern concepts of the devil, began his story in the sky. This verse points to a history of Lucifer as an ascended figure, one that began as perfect and holy but fell out of favor with God. The name Lucifer became synonymous with a name of the devil in Christianity, partially due to the 17th century epic poem Paradise Lost by John Milton. In his poem, Milton presents Lucifer, whom he calls Satan, as a proud, ambitious angel who falls from grace after rebelling against God. In this account, the fallen angel enters the Garden of Eden and takes the shape of a snake to tempt Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge. 3 planets, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter, can all be seen in daylight. When a personification of the morning star is encountered in myths, however, it is generally accepted to mean Venus or Mars. What was it about the morning star that captured the imagination of the ancients, and why was it so often linked to evil? This interpretation was not exclusive to the astronomers of the East, nor to the mythmakers of the West. The morning star demanded reverence and, at times, even human sacrifices from a place you may least expect, the Great Plains of Northern America. The sacrifice of the morning star. Scholars believe that, of the Great Plains peoples, the Pawnees had the most highly developed cosmology. Their primary god was named Tirawa. He was the purely spiritual creator of the universe, ruling over a variety of lesser gods who were divided into 2 groups, the gods of earth and the gods of heaven. The gods of heaven were, as you might expect, superior to the gods of earth. These heavenly spirits were associated with animals and helped elite people in Native American secret societies. By contrast, the gods of earth were associated with stars responsible for helping average people. The most important of these gods were the morning and evening stars, representing the male and female. The origin of man was linked to the union of these 2 stars, oddly similar to the Rosicrucian alchemical marriage philosophy of 17th century Europe.